Hello, art students. It's Sarah Farrington with you again. I am here to bring you another studio tour video. This one is all about geometry and math. So I'm first going to talk about how some other artists use geometry in their artwork, and then give you a little bit more information about how I use geometry in my artwork. I hope you enjoy it, and if you haven't seen the previous videos, feel free to check those out. Artists use geometry in their artwork often. For me, it is an important part of my studio practice. I want to quickly define a couple of words for you that you'll hear today. A shape is two-dimensional, and a form is three-dimensional. Two-dimensional means that there are only two dimensions, height and width. Three-dimensional means that there are three dimensions, height, width, and depth. Let's check out some artists who use geometry in their work. Tony Smith creates large polyhedra sculptures. Polyhedra means the form has more than 6 faces. His indoor sculptures are made of plywood covered in automobile undercoating, and the outdoor sculptures are made of steel. Peter Fourakis also creates large geometric sculptures. He was very interested in cubes, like the hypercube and the Archimedes cubes. His sculptures resemble flattened forms. They are made of steel. Diane Simpson creates axonometric drawings before creating her sculptures. An axonometric drawing is a way to draw a three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional surface. Her sculptures are made from a range of materials like wood or metal. John Edmark creates kinetic sculptures. Kinetic means motion, so kinetic sculptures can move. He uses mathematical concepts like the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence, which are like spirals, to inspire his laser-cut kinetic artworks. Mark and Eric DeMaine are a father and son artist and scientist team. They create computational origami structures, which means that they use computers to help them fold pieces of paper into sculptures. Let's take a look at how I use geometry when creating my sculptures. I often use geometry nets in creating my sculptures. A geometry net is a flattened three-dimensional form. When a form is flattened, it becomes a shape. That shape is the geometry net. A net shows all the faces of the form. When you cut out the net, fold along the lines, and put it together, it becomes a form. In 1525, Albrecht Dürer created polyhedral nets in his book, A Course in the Art of Measurement with Compass and Ruler. I use geometry nets often when creating my paper sculptures. For larger pieces, once the armature has been created, I determine whether a geometry net would work. When possible, I try to use one piece of paper, which is essentially what the net is. On smaller pieces, I almost only use nets. Some are simpler than others. The tissue box is basically a net of a cube, while an outlet or a light switch is a little bit more complicated and may have multiple nets. Let's take a closer look into how using a net for a tissue box works. I have to use the measurements of a real tissue box before I can make this work. Careful measurements and thoughts about how this form would look flattened. Then I can draw and measure, cut, fold, and glue together. Let's look at the multiple nets used to create the light switch. First, the net is carefully drawn. Here I'm making 4 light switches because I wanted to get more than one done at a time. So there's 4 nets for the switch plates of the light switch. Then it's carefully cutting and gluing so that the nets start folding to look like a light switch plate. Then we need to make the net for the light switch, the piece that you flip up and down to turn a light on. That one's a little bit more complicated, and around it is a smaller rectangular net that holds that part. If you look closely at the light switches in your house, you'll see what I'm talking about. Again, I was making 4 light switches, so I'm making 4 of each net that I need. Assembling these nets are a little bit more difficult. They're small and delicate, and I have to be careful. Once the switch plate is done and the toggle is done, all of it's glued together. Let's look at some more nets that I draw. This net will become the top of a box, while this net will become a picture frame, much like the frames you see here, as well as the box in the bottom corner. I also use nets to create light bulbs. The net is created using a template that is repeated. The template was made from drawing cross-contour lines on top of a light bulb, kind of like this one, to see what one shape would look like. Then that shape's repeated, cut, folded, and adhered together to create the light bulb. And very large nets that range from 30 to 40 inches can be used for very large picture frames to hang on the wall. Another geometric concept I use when working with paper are concentric shapes. A concentric shape is a shape repeated inside the same shape, but it gets smaller and smaller as more are added inside. On circular objects, I often need to draw more than one circle to help wrap the paper around the armature, like on the tops of these lamp bases. I also used concentric circles when creating the lampshades. I needed many of these concentric circles for the insides and the outsides of the tops and the bottoms of both lampshades for 2 lamps. So this was a lot of concentric circles. When wrapping it around something, I have to cut tabs on one part of the circle so that it can be wrapped up or down depending on what the armature needs. Let's take a look at when I would use a larger concentric shape. For the cushions of the chair, I would need large concentric rectangular shapes to go on top of and on the bottom of the chair cushions. For these large drawings, I use rolls of paper that are very long and about 42 inches wide. Once these concentric shapes are drawn and cut, they are adhered to the armatures built for the cushions. For the seat cushion, it is a tapered rectangular shape. Tapered means that it is wider on one end than it is on the other. The shape of the back cushion is a little different than the seat cushion. Because this cushion rests on the top of the arms of the chair, it's shaped more like a T, which means that the concentric shapes that I drew, cut, and folded are also in the shape of a T. The pieces are folded to the sides of the cushion just like the seat cushion. And where the 2 pieces of paper don't meet, more paper is added to emulate what it looks like when real chair cushions are made out of fabric. I hope you enjoyed this week's video and that you will stay tuned for the next one.